picture a map, the South China Sea, one of the most strategically vital bodies of water on the planet, roughly 3.5 million square kilometers, through which nearly a third of the world's entire maritime trade passes every single year. Now just zoom in. On one side, there's China, with the largest naval fleet in the world by numbers of ships, with artificial islands built out of nothing turned into military bases, with Coast Guard vessels that have been documented using water cannons and lasers against the vessels of smaller neighboring countries. And on the other side, there is Vietnam, a country of 100 million people with a 3,000-kilometer coastline facing this particular sea directly. A country that has been fighting China's territorial claims in these waters for centuries. And a country that right now needs friends with the military capability. On May 6, 2026, India and Vietnam sat down at Hyderabad House in New Delhi, and what was signed that day was officially called a partnership upgrade.
India and Vietnam have just taken one of the biggest steps yet in their relationship. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Vietnamese President Tô Lâm, who is on his first state visit to India on May 6, elevated bilateral ties to an enhanced comprehensive strategic partnership, a major diplomatic upgrade. Both countries announced plans to deepen cooperation across defense, digital payments, energy, technology, and trade. India has already extended a $500 million defense credit line to Vietnam for military modernization.
Now, what it Nehru arrived just a week after the liberation of Hanoi, and that this gesture of solidarity has never been forgotten by Vietnam. The friendship between Nehru and Ho Chi Minh was the founding expression of what scholars called as solidarity capital, a reservoir of mutual empathy built between two nations that shared the experience of colonial subjugation, the struggle of independence, and the aspiration to chart their own course in the world, which is dominated by the competing superpowers. See, during the Vietnam War, when the US was bombing bombing Vietnamese cities, India's position was unambiguous. India consistently supported Vietnam's sovereignty, it supported Vietnam's territorial integrity. And in Indian cities, people took to streets actually chanting a slogan that has no equivalent in any other bilateral relationship. Mera naam, tera naam, Vietnam, Vietnam. My name is your name, Vietnam, Vietnam. No government manufactured that particular chant. It came from the people. And this is how deep the solidarity ran between India and Vietnam. And then, when Vietnam's war, it finally ended, when the country reunified in 1975, India was amongst the first countries in the world to formally recognize the unified Socialist Republic of Vietnam. This is the foundation on which everything that happened on May 6, 2026 stands. Fast forward to the modern era, bilateral trade between the two countries was just 200 million in the year 2000. Just 200 million. By 2024, the number had gone to nearly $15 billion. This is a growth of actually more than 70 times in 24 years. And the trajectory has only accelerated. In 2007, India and Vietnam formalized the relationship with a strategic partnership. And notably, Vietnam was India's very first strategic partner within the ASEAN region. In 2016, this was upgraded to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And on May 6, 2026, exactly 10 years after the 2016 upgrade, it was elevated again to an enhanced comprehensive strategic partnership. Which is clear that the relationship between India and Vietnam is very, very strong as of now. So what actually happened when Vietnamese President Tô Lam's visit to New Delhi from May 5th to May 7th happened? See, let's go through the substance because the details are far more interesting than the headline. First of all, the visit itself was symbolically loaded. Tô Lam, which is also the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, had just recently assumed office. His first state visit abroad as a president was to India, not to China. India's primary strategic concern, not the United States, the world's dominant power, but India. That choice was deliberate and it was noticed. He began his visit not in New Delhi but in Bodh Gaya, one of Buddhism's most sacred sites ever in the world. He paid tribute to Rajghat to Mahatma Gandhi, and these were not empty gestures. These were an acknowledgement of civilizational connection that goes centuries deeper than any modern diplomatic architecture. On May 6th at Hyderabad House in New Delhi, PM Modi and Tô Lam held that bypasses China's dominance. Now, data point 3, the BrahMos conversation, which is the most watched defense story coming out of this particular visit. India's BrahMos, a super Vietnam is not a great power. It does not have a seat in the UN Security Council. It does not command a $1 trillion economy, but about it, let me know in the comment section. I hope you gained a new perspective from this session. All the very best and have a beautiful day. Thank you.